John grew up in Yellow Springs. He attended the Antioch School and hung out at Antioch College. The Indian Maiden in Jeopardy and the other hapless ladies of those times prepared John for his breakthrough film performance as the transsexual Roberta Muldoon in The World According to Garth. During the Shakespeare Festival of the 1950s, John trod the boards as a sprite, a fairy, or more often, a child soon to be slaughtered. A remarkable man is John Lithgow. His acting, his brush, his songs, and his pen have delighted the whole world over, and I'm proud to say I knew him when. Ladies and gentlemen, John Lithgow.
Thank you, Paula. That is just so generous, and yes, being victimized by my older sister and all of her friends was definitely a formative event, and I can credit all of you with making you the actor that I am today. I'm not exactly a bona fide Antioch alumnus. I mean, the family moved out of Yellow Springs just after my 6th grade year, and I've only been back to Yellow Springs a couple of times in all these intervening years, but they were extraordinarily formative years. I'm delighted to just pick up the thread on so many ways that I have connected with Antioch ever since, and how I feel Antioch formed me, even though I didn't go to college. At Antioch School, in a sense, was a little kind of junior varsity version of Antioch College. And I think it is from those very few years that I developed my own response to the Antioch philosophy. That is, that you learn by doing, that work is a joyous and creative experience, in which it should be very much a part of education. The Antioch School's community projects, which you will remember, Paula, this wonderful couple of weeks in which every student participated in creating a community in his or her class, where each of us ran a storefront enterprise. I myself was a storefront artist and took commissions to do portraits of people. Some of them pornographic, in fact. I simply did what I was paid for, with little paper dollar bills and paper coins done on a mimeograph. This was basically our work-study program that everybody, all these people a dozen years older than us, were doing at Antioch College as college students. So it is just, all of this has made me feel like an Antiochian. We did leave after my 6th grade year. I went to, lived in about 5 or 6 other cities, went to 6 or 7 other schools, but I always think of Yellow Springs as my hometown. And in a sense, I still feel like an Antiochian. Then there's all sorts of people that in later life I connected with. John Corty, a wonderful director. I did 3 or 4 projects with him. Who was a student at Antioch only a few years before. Actually, I guess he was probably a year or 2 after I left Yellow Springs. He became an Antioch student. And he was one of my favorite directors to work with, a terrific director, and a man who ran a film in the most collegial and generous-hearted way. And I can't help associating that with Antioch too. My dad, after leaving Antioch, he came, they were students in the 30s, but they came back in the late 40s. He, as a teacher of drama and literature, and along with Dal Dallas and Paul Treichler, the Antioch Area Theater, and the splendid Shakespeare Under the Stars, which from the early 50s to about 1958, produced every single one of the Shakespearean canon with Robin and I and David, all participating. I think I was in maybe 3 or 4 productions. I was in 20 Shakespeare plays before I was 20 years old. Robin and I were among those very, very lucky kids who gets imbued with Shakespeare before they even know it's difficult to understand. It's something we all shared together, all of us in our cohort, Paula, and that included Chris Roman, all the Dallas kids, all the Dewey kids. It was a wonderful community, and I feel like it was only yesterday. When I spoke to Suzanne and others about being a speaker tonight, they, knowing me as a sort of ubiquitous and almost obsessive performer, they invited me to perform, or at least to read. And I thought I was happy to do that, but I said, let me read Antiochians. So I picked out two splendidly notable Antiochians to read a little something that each of them spoke, not exactly wrote, but spoke. And the nice thing is that I have an ongoing personal relationship with both of them or I had it in later years. The first was Rod Serling. I sort of figured it out. Rod Serling graduated Antioch in 1950, which means he must have been a student of my dad's in some class or another, which has allowed me to boast over the years that my father taught Rod Serling everything he knows. What has bound me to him in my own history is I worked on two big projects, which were both the writing of Rod Serling. One of them was the film version in which I reprised the role of John Valentine in a Twilight Zone episode, acted by Bill Shatner, which I did in the movies, in Twilight Zone, the movie, a fabulous experience in which one of my co-stars with a one-line part was Rod's widow, Carol Serling. The other Serling involvement, not long after that, was I acted in Rod's original stage version of Requiem for the Heavyweight, which of course made Rod a household word all over again when it was done, first as a great television production in the 1950s with Jack Palance, and then as a film with Anthony Quinn. I did it at Long Wharf Theater. We did it on Broadway. And once again, Carol Serling was very much of that, part of that process. I found a wonderful little piece of Rod's. As I say, this is him speaking, not writing. He was interviewed by Marge Freed, whom so many of us remember from the Antioch Shakespeare Festival days. Marge both transcribed and wrote down for posterity the interview. So this is a little something from Antiochian Rod Serling. I think Antioch specializes in taking very special people into this college. I don't know what are specifically the academic or extracurricular requirements, but I do know they are preoccupied with the whole student. They want the kid who thinks, the kid who has written, the kid who's functioned in the high school situation. They want a kid with a point of view. They want a kid who can reason. They want a boy or girl who can come to a college campus as an adult and realize that they are up against 5 difficult years in terms of study, difficult in that they are demanding years. But this to me is truly the essence of the college situation. Plan to work. These aren't 5 years on the Riviera. This isn't vacation time. These are the only 5 years of your given life that you're going to have to hit books and observe and listen and think and reason. This is what a college education should be comprised of. And this is what Antioch supplies you. Those are a few words of Rod Serling, particularly useful on a night when we're raising money to support Antioch. And the other one is Coretta Scott King, one of the most notable of Antioch alumna. She, of course, a major figure of the civil rights movement, the wife of Martin Luther King Jr., extraordinarily dignified and powerful person, was also my babysitter. Now, I was too young to remember this. Many of the people on the Zoom tonight remember Coretta Scott King very vividly as Miss Corey Scott. She was an Antioch student in the 50s, and she was an assistant teacher at the Antioch School, which was, after all, a lab school. Robin had her as a teacher in the first and second grade cohort. Paula, you were there with Robin. I had a wonderful conversation with Robin last night in which she reminisced about a song that you, Paula, and Robin wrote together, which Coretta Scott King put on musical staffs and scored it and taught the students notation using your creation. I mean, what is a better example of an Antioch education than that? And what is superb evidence that had she not been a major figure in the civil rights movement, she would have been a remarkable teacher. I found out that she had been my babysitter, not from my family, not from my friends in Yellow Springs, but from Coretta Scott King herself. She was at an opening night party of the second Broadway show I was in. She was a friend of the producer. She introduced herself to me and told me that she had babysat for me as a child. Well, you can imagine how completely aghast I was at this news that nobody had told me. I have a little bit of Coretta to read to you tonight. These are words from a commencement speech she delivered at Antioch in 1982. The years I spent at this college, she said, were some of the most informative, challenging, stimulating, productive, and rewarding years of my life. Antioch did indeed provide me with the kind of preparation, training, and experiences that enabled me to stand with Martin Luther King Jr. as he stood in the forefront of the nonviolent civil and human rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, and to stand in my own right after 1968. Antioch taught me that change is a necessary part of growth and development, but that one must sustain stability in a constantly changing society. Chaos is a concomitant of the creative process. My 26 years in the nonviolent movement have been an experience in organized chaos. Yes, Antioch taught me how to cope. How wonderful to have these two remarkable people just distantly connected with my own life. And how wonderful that Antioch has them as two of their children they can brag about. Now, I'm going to read a little something of my own for you. Some of you may know, I've written books in the last 2 years, 2 books of political humor. They are doggerel poems satirizing our outgoing president, I won't use his name, and all the insane characters who sort of orbited in his galaxy over the last 4 grotesque years. One of them is called Dumpty, the age of Trump in verse, and the other is called Trumpty Dumpty wanted a crown, verses for a despotic age. I'm going to read 2 poems from the second of these. Trumpty wanted a crown to make certain he never would have to step down. He wanted a robe made of ermine and velvet. The Constitution, he wanted to shelve it. With impeachment awash, his ambition had grown. He wanted an orb, a scepter, a throne, 6 royal palaces, 6 royal carriages, a church dispensation for 6 royal marriages, courtiers installed on his own Supreme Court, and royal beheadings, if only for sport. He craved the occasional royal procession and, gasp, the eventual royal succession. Trumpty Dumpty gets his way, unless the public has something to say. If we let him have all of his favorite things, we'll have to endure the divine right of kings. And that's my little illustration. Trumpty Dumpty wanted a title. Trumpty Dumpty wanted a title. To him, an imperious handle was vital. Trumpty the Bold or Trumpty the Great, a moniker lending his legacy weight. He tortured his brain for a suitable label. Dumpty the Genius or Dumpty the Stable, Dumpty the Wise or perhaps the Sublime, not Dumpty the Orange. It's too hard to rhyme. While urgent emergencies went unaddressed, an appropriate nickname had Dumpty obsessed. But given what's past and what's yet to befall him, history will shortly decide what to call him. A POTUS whose pants are routinely on fire could be Dumpty the Huckster or Dumpty the Liar. With his bullshit throughout our pandemic attack, an apt nom de guerre would be Dumpty the Quack. With electoral help he's received from afar, there's Dumpty the Russian or Dumpty the Tsar. Racial intolerance, open the spigot for the odious record of Dumpty the Bigot. Daddy's podiatrist helped him defer, hence Dumpty the Bone and Dumpty the Spur. Take his prurient past and for accuracy's sake, call him Dumpty the Lecher or Dumpty the Rake. The scandals and crimes that have always erupted make him Dumpty the Venal, malign or corrupted. Compared to the others, going back to the first, whatever you name him, he's Dumpty the worst. What title can conjure this ludicrous gent, a POTUS who hastened a nation's descent? At the end of this age of profound discontent, I'll settle for Dumpty, the ex-president. Now just think how wonderful it is to have written a poem like that, and then to have it all come true, just exactly what we'd all hoped for. Here's the little gift I have for you. The fact is, with the best-selling success of these two books, my publisher entreated me to write a third one. They wanted to complete the trilogy, and I didn't want to do this at all. These are really, really hard poems to write, but eventually I caved when I came up with a good idea. I decided, I figured Dumpty is a dead horse, not worth kicking, very hard to satirize, and we're sick and tired of the man anyway. So I thought, why not try to write a book that leaves him behind and yet is still very much about him? I decided to basically write a book that says farewell to Donald Trump, and then proceeds to go. I decided to write a whole series of poems about various villains in history who, for various reasons, call Trump to mind. And I've written, here's the fun part. I've only written 3 of the poems. The first one is a prologue, and I have not read it to a single person until this moment. I'm making a little present of this to all of you. Who knows, the book may never come out, but just if it does, you'll say you heard it first at the Antioch Gala. Trumpty Dumpty was losing the race. A scowl beclouded his bright orange face. Watching his margin increasingly widen, he raged at his nemesis, Sleepy Joe Biden. The turbulent years of the POTUS's reign had shortened his temper and addled his brain. Like a latter-day Nero, Capone, or Iago, he prowled the precincts of plush Mar-a-Lago. "I've won," he inveighed. "It's a load of fake news. That nitwit's a loser, and I never lose." In a fever, he frantically seized on a plot to rally his base for a bold coup d'etat. From thence, Dumpty throttled our national life over 2 gruesome months of contention and strife. Political discourse was drowned in the muck by the quackery spewed by our manic lame duck. His treachery finally came to fruition. He stirred up his mob to an act of sedition. They laid siege in response to his rash exhortation to Biden's electoral certification. We watched them despoiling the Capitol dome like the Visigoths, storming the portals of Rome. "Horrors," we cried, "he's let anarchy loose. We've never beheld such despotic abuse." But never, my friends, is an awfully long time. Our history is replete with corruption and crime. Scoundrels abound and their damage is ample. Dumpty is merely the latest example. And so, for the moment, leave Dumpty aside and try to take all his offenses in stride. The voters have finally shown him the door. We've arrived at a time to revive and restore. Since we don't have to deal with this swine anymore, let's remember the Dumpties who've all gone before. And with that, I will say thank you so much for inviting me back into the fold. It's been absolutely wonderful to spend this time with you. Paula, mwah, you take it from there.